Cleveland Big Cat Williams racked up 82 wins, 62 by knockout,
which puts Williams down,
and built a reputation as one of the most feared heavyweights of his era. But for every highlight in the ring, there was a darker headline outside it. A brutal police shooting left him fighting for his life. A violent assault involving a meat cleaver nearly cost him everything. And after surviving it all, he died alone on a street corner in the most tragic way imaginable. This isn't just a boxing story. It's about power, pain, and a man who kept fighting long after the crowd stopped watching. So how does someone go from terrifying the heavyweight division to being nearly forgotten? This is the rise, fall, and unfinished tragedy of Cleveland Williams. And it all starts with a boy in the Jim Crow South fighting just to survive. His saga began in hardscrabble Griffin, Georgia, not exactly the place you'd expect to find a future heavyweight terror. He was born June 30th, 1933, and by the time most kids were thinking about high school, he was already earning a living at a pulpwood mill. That kind of backbreaking work at 13 didn't just put food on the table. It built the kind of strength and grit you can't teach in a gym. You want to know where big cat toughness comes from? Try slinging logs for pennies before you're old enough to shave. By 14, he was already stepping into the ring, testing himself against grown men in his home state. No bright lights, no TV cameras, just a teenager with heavy hands and something to prove. He won 4 of his first 6 bouts, proof enough that the power was real, until state officials wagged a finger. Too young, son. They yanked his license and tossed him back to the mill. Most prospects would have sulked. Cleveland Williams? He just growled and bided his time. The minute he turned 18, he bolted for Tampa like a parolee tasting freedom. December 1951. Professional debut and an immediate demolition derby. Williams ripped through the Southern Circuit with 27 straight victories, 23 of them by knockout. That's not luck, that's artillery. Word spread fast. There's a new heavyweight in town who punches holes through rib cages. Promoters loved the knockouts, opponents hated the concussions, and fans finally had a reason to get to the arena early, because if you blinked, Big Cat had already finished dinner. That early run wasn't a nice little story, it was a warning label. And boxing, predictably, did what boxing always does with dangerous men. It cashed the checks and pretended not to see the storm on the horizon. They didn't call him Big Cat for nothing. Sure, Cleveland Williams was huge, broad shoulders, 200+ pounds of raw muscle. But there was more to it than size. He moved like a predator, always ready to pounce, always dangerous. He'd stalk you, cut the ring in half, then pounce with a right hand you never saw until the lights were already dimming. Heavyweights are supposed to be plodding tanks. Williams was a tank with cheetah suspension, and it wasn't just brawn. The guy oozed a quiet menace that made even seasoned pros uneasy at weigh-ins. No loud trash talk, no circus show, just a stare that said, "I'm here to hurt you, and I know exactly how." Promoters took one look at that package, size, speed, highlight reel knockouts, and started whispering, "Future champion." Fans didn't need convincing. The results spoke for themselves. In a heavyweight era overflowing with tough men, Big Cat still made everyone else look slow, ordinary, and painfully mortal. But boxing is never a straight line. Williams's climb hit its first pothole in September 1953. He ran into Sylvester Jones, dropped a decision, and tasted real defeat for the first time. It stung, but one loss can be written off as learning. Then came June 1954. Bob Satterfield, a certified bomber who punched holes in reputations. 3 brutal rounds later, the Big Cat was on the floor, and suddenly the whispers started. Maybe he's just muscle and trunks. Maybe he folds when the return fire is real. In heavyweight boxing, doubt spreads faster than blood. One bad night can turn headlines into eulogies. But those back-to-back setbacks didn't erase the highlight reel Williams had already built. And they sure didn't erase that right hand that could flip a switch on anybody's consciousness. He still belonged in conversations that included Marciano and Patterson. He just had to prove it all over again. But while he was busy rebuilding inside the ropes, The seams in his personal life were ripping wide open. Wins brought money. Money brought hang-ons. And discipline blurred after the gym lights went dark. The tougher the opponents, the louder the nightlife. Punches in the ring weren't the only blows he was absorbing, and that's the real story brewing here. A heavyweight with enough dynamite to rattle a champion, and enough chaos off-camera to blow up his own future. The next chapter wouldn't be written by a left hook. It would be carved by the brutal choices he made when no referee was there to break the clinch. And that off-camera chaos? It exploded into front-page infamy. By 1959, Cleveland Williams was flattening opponents for fun, but the knockout artist suddenly found himself trading headlines with something far uglier than a left hook. His relationship with girlfriend Gwendolyn Scott detonated in a nightmare straight out of a pulp crime rag. During a heated argument, Williams grabbed a meat cleaver, yes, a meat cleaver, and hacked at her, sending Scott to the hospital mangled and bleeding. Newspapers couldn't print the story fast enough. Big Cat's bloody rampage. Overnight, the heavyweight star became the face of boxing's nastiest scandal. Fans wondered if his next bout would be in the ring or in a courtroom. But in a twist that still reeks of celebrity privilege, Scott chose not to press charges. Williams walked free, his reputation battered, but his fists still licensed to fight. The message was ugly and unmistakable. If you can sell tickets and score knockouts, society's rules suddenly have an asterisk. Williams didn't exactly lay low after the cleaver attack. He doubled down on bizarre. A few days later, he literally jogged to the police station, sweatsuit, running shoes, the whole deal, and politely asked the desk sergeant to hand back the same blade he'd just carved his girlfriend with. No apology, no remorse, just, "Can I get my cleaver, please?" Cops were stunned. Reporters had a field day. What kind of man maims someone, then treats the murder weapon like a gym towel he forgot at the front desk? The episode painted a clearer picture than any mugshot. Big Cat lived by his own rulebook, untouched by the consequences that would have landed someone else behind bars. And the justice system? It basically shrugged. No charges, no trial, no jail time. Was it celebrity privilege? A victim too frightened or too loyal to testify? Or was it just the 1950s blind eye toward domestic violence? Pick your poison. The result was the same. Williams walked right back into the ring with nothing but a tarnished headline and maybe a lighter training schedule. For many fans, the message was grimly obvious. Fame can buy you plenty. Apparently, even a pass on attempted murder. The meat cleaver episode wasn't just a scandal, it was a flashing red light on the Big Cat's dashboard. Inside the gym, he was all discipline and drill sergeant focus. Outside it, pure volatility and violence. That same killer instinct that made him a force in the ring could just as easily turn destructive when the gloves came off. The headlines eventually went quiet, but the questions lingered. Should a star athlete face the same consequences as any other man? Does talent excuse behavior that would end most people's careers? If an ordinary man had swung that cleaver, he'd be writing letters from a prison bunk. Williams got a handshake, a headline, and another fight date. And that set the rhythm of his life, a pattern of close calls and second chances, where the line between triumph and disaster was always razor thin, but the cleaver was just the prologue. The real gut punch was waiting far from any ring or courtroom on a lonely Texas highway, where one pull of a trigger would rewrite Cleveland Williams's story forever. November 29, 1964, Houston, Texas. America is boiling with civil rights tension. And Cleveland Big Cat Williams is tearing down a dark stretch of highway when flashing red and blues snap on behind him. The trooper is Texas Highway Patrolman Dale Whitten, a man packing a .357 Magnum and, by all later accounts, a short fuse. Official story, speeding. Unofficial whispers, DUI suspicion. Either way, it's a routine stop. Right up to the second it isn't. What happened next depends on whose badge you believe. But here's the uncontested fact. Words flew, tempers snapped. Then, bang! Point blank, the Magnum roars and Williams folds. The slug rips through his abdomen, shreds his colon, shatters his right kidney, and buries itself in his hip. A heavyweight built on leg drive and torque is suddenly fighting just to breathe. Surgeons work the first miracle that night, but the bill comes due. 4 major operations in 7 months, kidney yanked out, bullet still jammed in bone like a grim souvenir. Nerve damage, partial paralysis, 60 pounds gone, and his once imposing frame reduced to something almost unrecognizable. The heavyweight who stalked opponents on cat-like legs now trembled just getting to the bathroom. The boxing world gasped. 1 second a title threat, the next a half-paralyzed question mark. And no matter how you slice the police report, one fact is ironclad. A single trigger pull on a lonely Texas highway gutted the big cat more thoroughly than any punch ever could. What made the whole ordeal even harder to swallow was the timing. Williams was weeks away from the payoff every contender dreams about, a January 1965 date with Ernie Terrell for the vacant WBA heavyweight championship. That was the shot he'd been chasing for years, the moment he could finally call himself a world champion. Instead, he spent those months fighting for his life in a hospital bed, the title chance slipping away with every passing day. Then came the legal kicker. Williams didn't see a courtroom as a victim. He walked in as the defendant. The charges? Speeding and resisting arrest. No mention of a nearly fatal gunshot. He pled no contest, paid $50, did a token stint behind bars, and limped out with a bullet still lodged in his hip. It felt like a strange twist. The man left with lifelong injuries was also the one facing punishment, while the trigger pull was ruled justified. And the deeper you dig, the uglier it looks. Was Williams buzzed behind the wheel? Maybe. Did he mouth off and resist? Possibly. But in 1960s Texas, a black man didn't need to be drunk to find himself at the wrong end of law and order. Williams later said he feared being dragged to Tomball, a town with a reputation for being tough on black folks, and witnesses claimed officers showered him with racial slurs before the shot rang out. So was this tragedy self-inflicted recklessness, or another grim chapter in Jim Crow policing? Physically, that .357 slug rewrote Cleveland Williams's blueprint. Nerve damage in the hip left him with a hitch in his gait. Partial paralysis stole the explosive torque that once made him a threat in the ring. Losing a kidney slashed his stamina. Months of rehab helped him walk, yes, but the predatory big cat footwork was nowhere to be found. He was never able to move with the same speed or throw punches with the same force again. And the damage you can't x-ray was worse. Confidence, that unseen fuel of every knockout artist, drained faster than his conditioning. Fans who once feared him now pitied him. Writers quietly struck his name from contender shortlists. Yet the man refused to read his own obituary. The title shot was gone, but in Cleveland Williams's mind, there was still one opponent left, fate itself, and he was itching for the rematch. How do you get back in the ring after losing a kidney, surviving multiple surgeries, and carrying a bullet that can never be removed? For Cleveland Williams, the answer was simple. You just have to. Doctors told him he'd never fight again, but Williams refused to let his story end on that Texas highway. Forget sterile rehab centers. Williams rehabilitated the only way he trusted: brute ranch labor. Sunrise to sundown, he slung 80-pound hay bales, wrestled cattle gates, and turned scar tissue into callus. No treadmills, no cryotherapy, just raw sweat in Texas heat. It was ugly and painful, but little by little, the weight crept back onto his frame, and the fire crept back into his eyes. And that stubborn refusal to stay down was about to shock everyone who thought the big cat had already roared for the last time. By 1966, almost 2 years after the shooting, Cleveland Williams did the unthinkable. He returned to the ring. The crowd's reaction said it all, a standing ovation for a man who had every reason to quit but chose to fight on. He wasn't supposed to be walking, let alone throwing punches. But when he knocked out Ben Black, it was less about the opponent and more about the victory over his own battered body. The roar of the crowd wasn't for the KO. It was for a man who refused to stay buried. Each fight in that comeback run was a miracle. His wins after his return weren't easy, but they were enough to put him back in the conversation. And in late 1966, he was rewarded with the ultimate shot, a fight against Muhammad Ali for the heavyweight crown. November 14, 1966, Houston Astrodome, the stage every fighter dreams of. This wasn't just a title bout, it was supposed to be a moment of redemption, the fairy tale ending to a brutal story. But reality doesn't care about fairy tales. Williams looked the part, broad shoulders, cold stare. But the reality was harsh. The sharpness, the speed, the fearsome fluidity that once terrified opponents, gone. Ali, on the other hand, was at the peak of his craft, fast, confident, untouchable. What unfolded wasn't the epic clash of titans fans had hoped for. It was a showcase of what happens when greatness meets tragedy. Ali put on a clinic, dropping Williams twice before the referee mercifully stopped it in the third.
Protect himself, can't do it. Left to the face, a left to the right. Williams down. He may not get up.
The difference between them was hard to stomach. Williams's punches had no sting. His legs didn't move like they used to. And that signature menace, the stalking, the coiled danger, it just wasn't there. He wasn't the big cat anymore. He was a fighter robbed by fate, trying to keep up with a sport that had moved on. What should have been a career-defining showdown instead became a sobering reminder of how much had been lost. That night, the world saw the gap between what Williams had been and what he'd become. The Ali fight didn't just end his title hopes, it cemented his reputation as a tragic figure in boxing, a man whose prime had been stolen by violence outside the ring. And yet, you couldn't help but respect him. Only a man utterly fearless or desperately hopeful would climb through those ropes, stripped of his former gifts, to face the greatest of all time. Was it raw courage? Stubborn denial? Hell, maybe it was both. But one thing's certain, Williams showed up to fight. After his loss to Ali, Williams announced his retirement. But walking away wasn't in his nature. By 1968, he was back in the ring, stringing together 5 straight wins to remind the world his spirit still roared, even if his body creaked. Reality, though, has a way of catching up. As the years went on, Williams faced younger, stronger contenders like Mac Foster and Al Jones. The losses piled up, his legs grew heavier, and the ghost of that Texas bullet lingered in every step. Yet still he fought, refusing to let the sport push him out completely. Finally, in 1972, Williams hung up the gloves for good, going out not with a world crown, but with 3 final wins, including the vacant Texas State heavyweight title. Hardly the championship parade he once envisioned, but maybe that's the point. In a career defined by cut-short dreams, that lone belt became proof that resilience can be its own kind of glory. But when the cheers faded and the crowds disappeared, Cleveland Williams was left with no title, no roar from the crowd, just an empty ring and the echo of what could have been. What remained was a man left to face a different kind of fight, one that didn't end with the sound of a bell. Drugs and despair isn't a headline anyone wants attached to their name, but for Williams, it became the harsh truth. His body, once a fortress, was now a battleground, and the fans had moved on. First to collapse was his health. That 1964 bullet never left him alone. Chronic kidney failure set in, and by 1988, things got worse. He lost his remaining kidney and started regular dialysis 3 times a week. Diabetes crept in too, draining what little strength he had left. No more training camps, no more spotlight. Just the cold click of machines and the daily grind of staying alive. The same warrior who dodged Ali's best punches was now locked in a fight for survival. And this time, there was no bell to save him. And when your body betrays you, the world shrinks fast. Cleveland Williams went from locker rooms and autograph lines to empty apartments and unpaid bills. The discipline that ran his life, early mornings, strict diets, endless sparring, was replaced by chaos. No trainers, no managers, no fans cheering. Like so many fighters, Williams hadn't planned for what came next. He hadn't saved for retirement, and the paydays from those glory years vanished in medical bills. The ring's structure gave way to a life with no corners or ropes to keep him safe. A fated champion stranded in a world that moves on without you. The spotlight was gone, but the problems were just beginning. Then came the darkest round. By the 70s and 80s, Williams wasn't just fighting dwindling health and dwindling bank accounts. He was entangled in the drug game. He was arrested and pleaded guilty to 2 conspiracy counts related to heroin distribution. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment, it was a damning pattern. According to court records, the judge pointed to Williams's history of involvement in the drug business as a key factor in his sentencing. From ring hero to headline criminal, he now faced the ugliest defeat of all, losing his soul to desperation. The court gave him 2 back-to-back 5-year prison terms, plus 3 years probation on each count, making it abundantly clear he was no longer just a fallen boxer, but a convicted felon. This wasn't the triumphant return fans craved. This was rock bottom. You can't help but wonder, how does a man go from trading punches with the greatest of all time to facing years behind bars for drug charges? The story isn't unique. Few sports leave you a safety net. Retirement plans? Mental health support? Not in his day. Once the crowd stopped cheering, the silence was deafening. For Williams, that silence was filled with regret, failing health, and the fallout of choices made in a desperate scramble for survival. It's tough to say if things could have been different. Maybe with better financial education, real mental health support, or a genuine safety net for fighters stepping away from the ring. But Cleveland Williams wasn't afforded any of that. He faced his demons alone, chronic illness, addiction, and crushing isolation stacking up like punishment rounds with no bell. And just when you think it can't get any bleaker, fate dealt him one final, brutal blow, this time not in a boxing gym or a courtroom, but on the unforgiving streets of Houston. On September 3, 1999, Cleveland Williams did what he'd been doing for years. He finished a dialysis session and began the slow walk home. 66 years old, his body a roadmap of every punishment he'd ever taken, both in and out of the ring. The big cat still put one foot in front of the other through streets that had never gone easy on him. Then came the unthinkable. As he crossed the road, a car whipped around the corner, hit him, and kept going. No screech of brakes, no apology. Just a man left crumpled on hot asphalt, unconscious, while life rushed on around him. He never woke up. He was in a coma for a full week before passing away on September 10, 1999. A hit and run that would never be solved, a driver who would never be found. No justice, no closure, just silence, the cruelest end for a fighter whose life was defined by one more round, one more comeback, one more chance. The irony is cold. How does a man who survived a bullet and brutal knockouts meet his end on an everyday street? Williams had faced down some of the most dangerous men in boxing history. He'd lived through a shooting that would have ended the careers, maybe even the lives, of most men. He got up off the canvas over and over in the ring and in life, yet in the end, it wasn't a punch or a bullet that finished him. There's something about the way it happened that sticks with you. Williams's life was never simple, never safe. From the pulpwood mills of Georgia to the bright lights of the Astrodome, he was always fighting, against opponents, against his own mistakes, against the world's indifference. By the late 90s, most had forgotten the man whose right hand once shook the boxing world. No national outcry followed the hit and run. No grand memorials, no rush to honor his legacy. For those who remembered, the news was a gut punch. For most, it barely registered. But look closer. Williams's fate speaks to every fighter whose glory days vanish when the last bell rings. He survived poverty, racism, near-fatal gunfire, and the harsh business of boxing. He answered every count, no matter how devastating the blow. And yet, when his greatest battles moved off camera, the world simply moved on, leaving the big cat to cross a busy street alone, only to be felled not by an opponent's punch, but by a stranger's speed. His ending wasn't just tragic, it was a verdict on a system that glorifies warriors until the next big fight, then forgets them once the lights go out. You have to ask, What does resilience really buy you? Does surviving the impossible mean anything if the world forgets you in the end? Cleveland Williams's life and death force us to confront the true cost of greatness and how easily we let heroes slip through the cracks. Yes, he was flawed. His choices, domestic violence, tangled in crime, complicated everything. Yet he kept showing up, round after round, even when nobody was watching. He refused to quit. His final tragedy wasn't just a hit and run, it was dying without the recognition or closure he earned. A man who poured his body and soul into boxing deserved more than a footnote. Every account of Cleveland Williams boils down to the same truth. He hit like a freight train, but life hit back even harder. Legends like George Foreman and George Chuvalo swore he was among the fiercest punchers they ever faced, and the ring ranked him the 49th greatest puncher in history. Yet even that raw power couldn't deflect the real world's cruelest blows. From the meat cleaver assault to the Texas highway shooting, from his lone title shot against Ali to the courtroom, each blow rewrote his narrative, turning a rising star into boxing's most tragic what if. Williams's story shows us that talent and toughness aren't a bulletproof vest against life's nastiest punches. His legacy isn't just in record books, it's in the raw testament of a life where every victory came at a steep price, and where the world's applause proved fleeting. That's a story worth remembering. So here's the question that lingers long after the final bell. What does Cleveland Williams teach us about the true cost of greatness? How do we honor the fighters who gave everything once the lights go out? We'd love to hear from you, so drop your thoughts in the comments down below. And if his story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. We've got more untold boxing tales coming your way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.